Okay, so we're going to get started. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗘, Chief Catalyst and Navigator of 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗘 Consulting. I want to welcome you to our inaugural Masterclass, Become a Future-Ready Leader. This class is for you, and its success will be in large part based on your active participation. You know, all of us here, everyone is facing somewhat similar challenges, at least externally and very often internally. Let's use this opportunity to learn from each other, ask questions, challenge each other to be the best we can be. Let's go. So in my LinkedIn post announcing this session, I talked about what can happen when an organization becomes future ready. Now, just as a reminder, we talked about customers' needs. When you're future ready, their needs are anticipated and they're met. When you're future ready, your employees are enabled, they're energized, engaged, they're high performing, productive, and they feel valued, which is really important. With your partners, whether that be suppliers, distributors, resellers, you're not sitting across from each other, you're sitting next to each other because you're collaborating to achieve shared goals. And I know collaboration came up earlier as an important attribute. The communities in society around us, are healthier, they're better off because we're responsible. We're practicing ethical business practices. And as a result of these four, shareholders are richly rewarded as a result. And the key word here is result, because unless those other four things happen, shareholders are not going to be rewarded as richly or in a sustainable way for long-term shareholder value. So we're going to be using Slido. It's an app that you can use on your phone if you scan the QR code or type in slido.com along with that number. We're going to be using that for a number of interactions for polling word clouds and surveys. As we go along today, please enter your questions and comments in chat. I'll be checking that periodically. And if for some reason your question is not answered during the session, I'm going to be sending out an FAQ within the next couple of days. So with that, we're going to have the first survey question. 𝗪𝗑 talked about right. So one of the things 𝗑 talked about was beginning with the end in mind. So if we think about those stakeholder outcomes, about customers, employees, partners, society, and shareholders, to achieve those desired outcomes, what would need to be different about leadership in your organization and the organization overall? Take a minute or so and type in those attributes in Slido and describe what would be different, how that would change. Okay, so we're starting to see some answers coming in. So if you haven't scanned the QR code, please do so. Clarity of goals, accountability, more diversity. The organization will be more empowering and trusting. Alignment around values, transparency. Yeah, it's coming up is a very important item more and more. So another 30 seconds, last chance to, if you haven't done so already, to enter what you think would need to change in the organization. If you're going to be able to achieve those outcomes that we were talking about. All right, so, if we look at this in total, this sounds like a pretty good place, where there's more open and honest communication, where there's transparency, more empowering, more trust, clarity around goals. It sounds pretty good. Who would not want these attributes? So now we have a sense of where we want to go, the type of organization we want to create. But let's come back to today and think about the reality we're facing. So if we think about the forecast, what we've read in the press, turbulence and uncertainty are expected to continue. So if we can put in chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, what macro events, what ongoing crises or disruptions are affecting your business? What is or could be on the horizon? So, you can put your comments in chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. So we're seeing increasing client demand, and you're in a social services agency, so people are needing more help, regulatory requirements. Yes, elections are happening. I believe I heard is like 70% of the world's population is having an election this year. So that can certainly change directions. AI, absolutely. Global unrest. Yeah, there's no shortage of that. As we think about it, we talk about global unrest. We have the continuing war in Ukraine. We have the stresses between Taiwan and China. We have issues around the Middle East. Shipping routes are being challenged, and some of that, disruption runs the risk of spreading. Economics. Certainly, Victoria mentioned sustainability and some of the backlash. Things have gotten way too political and polarizing, that we're not always thinking about what's best for society, what's best for business. Absolutely. So there's a lot going on, and many of these things are interconnected and impact each other. So now the question is, what's happening internally? So what's going on inside your company? What kind of challenges and crises or disruptions are you having inside your organization? So if you'd put your answers in chat. Yes, absolutely. Hybrid working. So working from home, return to office, or something in the middle is something a lot of companies are wrestling with. Layoffs. Yes, we're seeing that. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was talking particularly in the tech sector where people thought, they could easily go between jobs. Different companies, that they were secure and insulated, are finding out they're not. Companies facing supply chain complexity. Absolutely. And, that's happening internally. It's also because of macro events as well. Budgets, absolutely. If you're in a social service agency and you're not able to deliver the services your clients need. Yes, regulations. We're seeing more and more in terms of reporting requirements, in terms of what you can and can't do. Obviously talk about, how we're going to handle AI and competition for resources, ineffective leadership, and workforce planning. Culture, absolutely. Culture is a big one inside of companies. When we think about, challenges, especially in a global environment, different areas of the world, different countries. If you think about the EU, have different rules and regulations. So, if we take all of that together, it's pretty darn messy. There's a lot of interdependent, interconnected stuff that's happening around us. And the outlook is that this is expected to continue. So what are we doing to handle these challenges? Or in some cases, these are actually opportunities. And how is that working for you? I suspect these pictures will resonate with many of you. There's a sense that you've been firefighting for a while. I know, a lot of the businesses that I work with, networking contacts, they keep on saying, I can't think about the long term. I've got to put out these fires. Things are urgent. I got to deal with what's in front of me. So, question for the group is, what impact does this have on your leaders and on your organization? So feel free to unmute or, put your answers in chat.
Just so I'm not typing quite so much, Jay, I would just say I think sometimes it feels like you're trying to maintain a sense of calm and direction, and have plans that going into the future are flexible enough to anticipate some of these changes. But I think it takes a toll just in terms of it feels like there's a lot of pivoting that's necessary, but also a lot of really making sure that the principles you're starting out with are really solid and really core values, so that you're not constantly, so people don't feel the chaos as much as they might otherwise.
No, I mean, providing that sense of, grounding, of certainty that you can have, while you're in the store. People are burned out. Absolutely. They're tired. They're getting disengaged. They're getting frustrated, whether it's in terms of how they're treated, or it just feels like one wave after another wave. And as we think about this, it's definitely causing us to think about the short term. People are wondering where we're going. What's our sense of direction? We are reacting, often reflexively or emotionally. We can fight, we can run away, or worse, we can freeze. And if we think about it, what impact, we've talked about the impact it has inside the organization. What impact does it have on the business and its stakeholders? So you can put your answers in chat or unmute.
Yeah, Jay, I was thinking in terms of stakeholders, that a lot of times there's disparate interests, and even across the employees/leadership C-suite, there might be different sub incentives. I don't want to say, I don't want to make it sound negative, because it's not necessarily negative. There's competing interests, and they're all important, but how many of them are aligned with the stated purpose or the desired outcome? And so sometimes it might seem for leaders that there are people with good ideas, but they're just on the radio telling the firefighters where to go and how to fight the fire, and it all just becomes noise and chatter after a while. And it's I think it's having an effect on stakeholders, especially even if we look at employees. It starts to affect their morale. Why am I even doing this? Because their employee experience is low. They feel they can't meet a customer's needs, so now that affects customer experience, because the customer doesn't feel cared for, depending on whether it's a service or retail or some other type of venture.
No, absolutely. That impact can be huge. Conflicting interests, very often it gets people thinking in a binary fashion, win-lose, instead of looking for that third way. Lack of confidence in the business. Go on, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, I think sometimes too, at least for me, it makes me a little gun shy, and probably a little more closed and less transparent than I should be, because you're waiting to have sort of all the facts or a more stabilizing influence, and that's not always as readily available as you would like. So I think you have to work a little harder as to what you can be transparent on, and how you can help the organization to see that you can make it through not having all the facts or living with some uncertainty.
Well, and we're going to talk about that. We're all finding out we have to make decisions without having all the facts. We've got to take what we know. Sometimes take our best guess. Sometimes let employees know we don't have all the answers, but express confidence that we as a group, as a team, can find those answers. Good discussion. So as we think about this, is this sustainable? And I think we've already answered that question, that people are facing burnout. They're disengaging. Any other reasons? Anybody think this is a sustainable strategy? I'm going to take silence.
Hey, Jay.
Yes, please.
Just a couple of thoughts on this. You're making me think of my own experiences, but I've seen it both ways. I've seen one person being the visionary for the entire organization that was very successful, because it was, this is where we're heading, and you're coming with me or you're not going to be on the train, to a transition of, there's a more of a flattening experience where it was, you're expected to drive innovation and change in the world we live in. You've constantly got to be reinventing yourself. I just think of Netflix, which has just been a major disruptor, for the movie industry lately. And I mean, if you don't have an environment that's agile enough that your people can change at a moment's notice the direction of where you're going, it's very difficult with the way technology has advanced communication to stay viable in the marketplace. So it's very difficult for the employees, I think, and maybe I've experienced that, like, to follow that change and keep up with it.
No, absolutely. As you think about it, that agility, that resiliency is important. And those who have it, realize that, that gives them some staying power. And, I had a client who once said, we get everything done. We satisfy our clients, but it's always through heroic efforts. And his comment was, that's not sustainable. It needs to be spread. It can't just be one or two people. And, that's where, fire prevention is just as important as firefighting. So if we think about all of this, are we in our organizations ready for the future? Have we even started the journey to future readiness? So I want to know what you think. So, quick survey. I'm concerned about our preparedness and readiness for the future. So thinking about yourself, your leadership team, your organization, kind of in a blended way. Do you agree with that statement? Somewhat agree, somewhat disagree, or disagree? So another 15 seconds to vote. So I think we've got a couple of people who haven't voted. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what do we have? 50% somewhat agree. So it's on your radar screen and it's important. Almost 40% agree. And I'm suspecting we had a couple people who are somewhat disagreeing. So you kind of get a sense of where organizations are, that there's a way to go. So the question is it significant enough to get us to change? This is very easy to say, thinking that we need to do something differently, thinking that we're concerned, but are we ready to actually do something about it? So I'm asking you to stick your necks out here a little bit. And the question is it imperative that we individually and collectively become future ready? So think about this as you're signing up, you're making a commitment. This is where actions meet your words. We're seeing almost 100% saying absolutely yes. And I would agree with that. And it's also recognizing that there's significant risk to doing nothing. Think about the risk. If there's a hurricane coming, you're ignoring the storm warnings, and the day before you're like, oh, what do I do now? For me with cochlear implants, being future ready for me is having charged batteries, because I never know when, if I'm worked all day and I go out to a networking session, the batteries go. I'm dead in the water. So I need to have charged batteries, because if I'm dead in the water, what that means to me is I hear nothing. So I like that. ABC, always be charging. Absolutely. What we've done in this first section is we built the case for change. There's almost universal agreement here that we need to do something differently. So now we need to talk about what do we need to do and how to do it. We're going to talk about this in the next section. So this is one of my favorite quotes. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. What we've been doing for many of us is not sufficient. We can't just go back to the way we've always done it, because that was under different circumstances that might have made us successful in the past, but not necessarily now. The toughest thing is to unlearn, let go, stop doing something that no longer makes sense. You know, as we go through the rest of today and in the future sessions, start to keep a list of what you need to learn. What are things you need to unlearn, stop doing? And what lessons and experience and expertise from the past do you need to strengthen? And that's going to, you know, each of these are going to be based on your own companies, your own situations, but start to keep that list. So what do we actually need to do? I'm going to share 4 foundational behavior or mindset shifts that we have to make. The first is recognizing we don't get to choose our circumstances, but we can choose how you respond, how we respond. And the choice is, will we choose to be a captain? Somebody who takes charge, rides the ship, steers the ship through the storm, motivates the crew, provides a sense of purpose? Or are we going to be a captive, a victim of our own thinking, saying it's out of my control, I can't do anything? And then you're at the mercy of the waves. I think we'd agree that captives don't have a very pleasant experience and don't do very well. So, you know, part of this is recognizing what can we influence and what can we control? Because we always have that choice about what we want to do. So, poll question here. As leaders, as individuals, what can we actually influence and control? I want to break that idea that we can't do anything. So let's talk about what we can do individually, as a leader, as an organization. So when people say, we can't do anything about this, you have a response. So if you would, you know, enter your thoughts now, I kind of get a sense of where we are with this. Co-creation, absolutely. You know, how we work together, create things together. We absolutely control our attitude and how we collaborate. Choosing to remain true and ethical. Absolutely. Everyone makes that choice. Our attitude, how we treat one another. You know, do we keep our integrity? We control absolutely how we communicate, what information we share, how we control our culture, you know, almost as a counterweight to the chaos around us and the challenges. Values-based leadership, how we empower others. We get to choose how we respond to the challenges, to the adversity. Absolutely. So there's actually a lot of things we can control, how we treat one another. So it's recognizing we can make that difference. We can help things happen. So it's important that we remember that we can take agency. We can shape our future instead of being shaped by it. So now I want to talk about 3 behaviors. So we talked about choosing to be a captain. 3 behaviors. Now, it's important to see, think, and do differently. There's a quote that is often attributed to Einstein that doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different to happen is insanity. It doesn't work that way, right? So when we talk about seeing, thinking, and doing differently, let's talk about what each of these mean. How can we see differently? How might we look at things differently? I think it's important to see things from different perspectives. Customers' perspective, employees' perspective, partners, community and society overall, and certainly from shareholders. So that's one way of seeing differently. Instead of thinking about what's best for the company, think about these other stakeholders. Or instead of thinking about what's best for you, think about these other stakeholders. And seeing things from a different perspective very often helps us find a solution, helps us realize a gap. And it's also important to be able to zoom out, see the big picture. We get so caught up in our day-to-day, we need to pull back and look at what's going on, in the big picture, in the scheme of things. But it's also important sometimes we can't just always be looking at the landscape. Sometimes we need to zoom in and get the detail so we know what to address. This is all about understanding the context. How can we think differently? Yeah, I know earlier when we talked about things we can improve, it's about this, we heard strategic thinking, critical thinking, how we frame things. So when we think about ways of thinking differently, think about the different models, the business models, the mental models we have. Not everything can be solved by an economy of scale or the 80-20 rule. So those are mental models. It's also important to think about our tools and our frameworks. If I go back, 15 years ago, 20 years ago at GE, Six Sigma, everybody used Six Sigma, Six Sigma. And that's a tool. It's not the answer to everything. Just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything is a nail. So it's having those different tools and frameworks. And it's also about mindset. Do we have a fixed mindset that everything's predestined, that people either win or they lose, and that we can't learn anymore? Or do we have a growth mindset where we can grow the pie, everybody can get a bigger share, and we can learn and grow? Or a positive mindset versus a negative mindset. So these are different ways of thinking differently. And I think it's important, and we're going to talk about this a lot as we go on, this idea of both and thinking versus either or. So if we look at the picture, at the bottom, we can be a miner. We can be extracting and exploiting what's there, or we can be an explorer, looking for new opportunities, for new things. But the reality is we need to do both for a sustainable and successful company, because that mining fuels and funds what's going on the exploration side. There's a reason Reese's put peanut butter and chocolate together, so people didn't have to choose. So does anybody have any other ideas on how we can think differently? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat.
I absolutely, somebody, actually the general counsel at Target had a conversation at one of our industry events, and we were talking about mentoring, and he not pioneered, but within Target, he introduced the concept of reverse mentoring. And largely it was so that folks who are established have access to sort of folks who are younger and or newer to the organization and or different in some diverse way. And I like that a lot. We often think about providing mentoring to others, but I think there's ways that we can go out and really try to tap into and listen and solicit feedback on our performance and the way that we show up from others.
No, I mean, that is so true. I have two boys, 23 and 27. In the insights that they give me, in terms of what their friends are thinking about, what they're seeing, is so insightful. I mean, we probably all might remember the movie The Intern and how each side learns from the other. And if you haven't seen it, it's probably worth watching again and just thinking through that in your own work life. Now, I have to tell you, seeing differently is good. Thinking about what you see differently is better. But it doesn't matter until we start to do differently. Because when we do something differently, that's where we create value. So what can we do differently? How do we not settle for the status quo? I think first, it's important to be open to create new things, to innovate, to think about how we can improve things, different ways. There's a saying, there are multiple ways to skin a cat. Nothing against cats, but it's thinking about what could we do differently? What would need to happen for us to do something? Instead of saying, I can't, say, how could I? And just kind of reframe the problem so that we're open.
Jay,
yes, please.
Jay, I think in today's environment, there's a huge emphasis on the customer experience and the employee experience. And many of us grew up in a product environment, which was feature function oriented, with no attention to what the customer experience or employee experience was. So I think this might be a different way to do differently.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. The other thing is about becoming and staying prepared. We've talked about, this about becoming a future ready leader. If you think about Scouts, those who have been involved in Scouts, the motto is be prepared. Well, how do you be prepared for a Scout if you're out in the wilderness? You have a tent, you have a flashlight, you have a knife. If you're lucky, you have matches, or at least you know how to rub two sticks together. If you live in Florida, you're probably prepared for a hurricane. Publix was a client of mine, so fifth, sixth largest supermarket in the US. They're primarily in the Southeast. They had hurricanes down pat. But when it came to a lot of other disruptions, like when COVID hit, all of a sudden they realized this was a staffing issue. They employ a lot of retirees, which they saw as stable, a lot of young people, in the store. But all of a sudden, the retirees didn't want to put themselves at risk. And the younger people, their parents were saying, don't go into work, stay home. So they had to quickly figure out how they were going to get prepared and change how they hired in the process for that, shortening hiring from a 4 or 5 week process to literally a week. What steps could they take up? So when we think about doing differently, we've talked about the what in terms of being a captain or a captive, about see, think, and do differently. What capabilities, though, do we need to have? And the fact of the matter is, and I think we've all said this, we need new leadership capabilities to thrive. And that's how I came up with, and have actually been living, the 5 leadership superpowers. Now, the 5 leadership superpowers do not replace core leadership skills. You still need to have a vision, be able to set goals, to communicate, to motivate people, to form a team, to set values and things like that. Still very important. But the superpowers are what helps you navigate the turbulence, the white water around you, where you don't know what's coming up ahead, or you have a limited view. The 5 leadership superpowers, when we talked about both and thinking earlier, and that's imperative with the superpowers. Each one of the superpowers is about managing attention. So let me run through these or walk through these. And in the future sessions, we're going to be diving into each in more detail. So first is being a present futurist. It's about understanding the present, about seeing things from different perspectives, but at the same time, having some foresight, thinking about the future, what's on the horizon, looking at trends and things like that, and integrating the two together. Being an experienced learner. So we've talked about this today. We can't just rely on our experience and expertise. We have to learn. We have to be open-minded. We have to be curious. So it's bringing those two things together that provides a fuller picture, that makes us more adaptable, more capable. Next is being a prepared risk taker. Risk taking is a part of business. No matter what choice we make, there's risk. Making no choice, doing nothing, has risk. So be smart about the risks you take. Take calculated risks, small risks. It's equally important to become and stay prepared. And being prepared means being more risk aware. Putting some basic things in place. I mean, you think about it, in our homes, we have WD-40, duct tape, probably more toilet paper than we had 5 years ago, and batteries and different things like that. We need to think about what preparedness means in our companies. Fourth is being a strategic executor. You need both sides. If all you have is strategy and no execution, it's like having a hallucination, excuse me. And if all you're doing is executing, you're operating, but you have no strategy, in all likelihood, you're just very busy, but not necessarily going anywhere. So strategy and execution need to come together. They need to be linked. And it's recognizing that short-term decisions can have long-term implications, and being wary and considering that. Fifth is being an accountable collaborator. Now, we heard a lot about collaboration, and we saw a lot in the word clouds. Most complex situations, most challenges we're actually facing today require collaboration, whether that be across functions, breaking down silos, across departments, even with our ecosystem partners. And that collaboration is to achieve a shared goal, a goal that the team, the people who are collaborating, can actually impact and achieve. And teams can be held accountable, because if you need a team to solve a problem, it's very unfair to point the finger at one person, because that person can't do it alone. Teams can be held accountable for outcomes. They manage their own activities, but they're accountable. So if you think about a soccer team for a minute, soccer team must work together to be successful. The outcome that they share is scoring goals and winning games. That's what's important. They don't worry about who had the ball the most, who ran the fastest, how many times somebody kicked it. That's minutia. Yet we have people who measure and manage that. So it's having that team being able to do that. And I see a comment that Scott put in. The challenge is not being accountable for a cross-functioning team collaboration and communication. Yes, leaders need to foster that, enable that. We have a big role. So those are the 5 leadership superpowers. And taken together, they help and inform one another. And what happens when these are in place? We can make better, faster decisions. We're more prepared and ready for what comes. We recover faster. We're able to adapt, and we're able to pounce on opportunities. Now, over the next 3 weeks, next 3 Tuesdays, we're going to be talking about each one of those in more detail, and what you can do, what tactics, what strategies, through examples, what each of these mean, and how you can become a superpowered leader. So let's review what we've covered. We've built the case for change that we can share with others. We've talked about what we need to change in becoming a captain, seeing, thinking, and doing differently. And for those, and with the superpowers, we're starting to talk about how do we need to change. And the next 3 sessions will expand on that how. So next up, we have 3 more sessions. Sessions are going to be on February 13th, 20th, and 27th, same time at noon, EST. For those on the West Coast, that's 9, and for those in Europe, at least in London, it's 5 p.m. Next session, we're going to dive into being a present futurist and experienced learner. Then in session 3, we're going to get into what does it mean to be a prepared risk taker and strategic executor, and how to do that. And in the 4th and final session, we're going to be talking about becoming an accountable collaborator and examples of that and how that happens. We'll talk about the power of 5, how the 5 leadership superpowers come together to have exponential impact, and talk about next steps, about how you can do this in your organization, how you can make yourself a future-ready leader. As a reminder, if you have not completed the free future readiness assessment, that is available. And that was also in the invite for today's session. And you can see the link there. Think about who else should be attending this series of classes. Who else in your network, who else in your organization can benefit from this discussion? Invite them to register and join. as the sessions are recorded, if you miss the first session, that will be available to you. And lastly, when this session ends, I invite you to complete the survey. And I want your feedback. It's very important to me in terms of the value and how I can fine-tune future sessions. And I want you to remember to save the chat. If you go to the bottom of the chat, you'll see 3 dots all the way at the bottom. If you click on that, you'll have the option to save the chat. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. What kind of commitment you're going to make about what you will do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that way I can see everybody. What kind of questions do you have? We've covered a lot. So I'd be surprised if you didn't have questions about what you can expect, whether it's about the 4 classes or any of the content.
I think one of the things, Jay, that's very tough for all 5 of these is alignment, because we're moving so fast and we're bringing in people with different experiences and backgrounds, and getting everyone aligned is a huge challenge.
Tell me what you mean when you say aligned, in terms of the superpowers or what people are doing in the organization.
I think aligned in terms of the business and where it's going to go and how we're going to get there. And the how we're going to get there, of course, really calls the superpowers into play in terms of accountability, risk, and future learning.
You know, one of the things, you know, we can get into this when we talk about experienced learner, but part of the issue is onboarding. You know, how do we bring people on? How do we make sure that they can start off on the right foot in terms of, you know, where we're going, how relationships need to work, what values are most important? Other comments or questions? None? Well, feel free to email me, J@jweiser, with any questions, or on LinkedIn. You can also message me. I want to thank everybody for spending their time this afternoon, this morning, or this evening with me. I hope to see everybody back next Tuesday when we talk about Present Futurist, an experienced learner. So I wish you all a great rest of the day. And as this session ends, please do complete the survey. Bye for now.
See you, Jay. Thank you.
Take care.